My friends, for a while now, there's been a question in this community, and that question has been, is Cyrax the next Chris Chan? Now, a million people have answered this in a million different ways, but I want to give you guys my take on it today. So we're going to look at the similarities and the differences between these two, and see if Cyrax really is, if he has the potential to take the lolcow mantle that Chris left when he went into jail. So what I did today was I got some gameplay of Cyrax versus Chris Chan in the WWE ring. You know, they are in a 30-minute Iron Man match. That means they got 30 minutes to wrestle. Whoever has the most pins or submissions by the end wins. So you guys enjoy that gameplay in the background. And without further ado, let's jump right into it and talk about the similarities between the two. Because there are a whole lot of similarities between old Cyrax and Chris. Now first, the elephant in the room and the most obvious one, they both have mental disabilities. Now with Chris, you know, I would say Chris is a little more grounded to earth than Cyrax, but then again, you read these jail letters, you hear Chris talking about how he's Jesus Christ himself, and then you go, maybe not, maybe not. But at the same time, Cyrax has had a lot of very similar troll altercations as Chris had, you know. He's been dealing with trolls, calling them on the phone. I mean, you can look at any Cyrax and Music Biz Marty call and see that. But at no point back then, you know, Chris, I think the worst and the most angriest Chris got was during the Blue Spike call where he was just screaming the fuck, like he was screaming his head off at Blue Spike. But Cyrax, you can find him almost on a nightly basis screaming death threats, screaming bloody murder. And for both of these guys, it just shows the state they're in, you know? I think Cyrax is in a much more, like, crazed mental state than Chris, but then again, with the way Chris is now, we really don't know. All we're getting from Chris is these jail letters where he sounds absolutely more batshit than he's ever sounded. But when you look at it that way, it's a big similarity because they both have failing mental states. It's obvious. And is it cool to make fun of people like that for this reason? I mean, absolutely not. But remember, Chris did some absolutely horrible shit to his mother that can't go not talked about, and Cyrax tried talking to a 14-year-old. So once again, you can't not talk about this shit. It's still pretty fucked up. Which leads us into a difference between the two, and that's that Chris likes them old and Cyrax likes them young. Now, to be fair, Cyrax has never actually gone through with anything with a minor. He just talked about it, talked about wanting to do it, and sent pictures to someone who he thought was a minor. Now, Chris, we all know what happened with Chris. Chris deadass boinked his mom, is in jail right now for doing so. So, I guess in that sense, you know, Chris actually, and we'll talk about another difference between the two that has something to do with this later, but yeah, Chris actually went through with the weird shit, whereas Cyrax he kept his solely online. Now, Cyrax has done tons of other weird shit in his life, like the Blind Billy shit, but once again, we will get to that once we get to that. Another thing that both have in common is that both are absolute homebodies. Now, Chris not so much over the past year because he got forced out of his house and is now living in a indefinite jail stint, but we all know if Chris could be home, he'd be home right now just playing his video games, doing what he always did. Now, Cyrax is indoors 24/7. I don't even think this man has seen sunlight in years. Now, this is something, however, that you can say back in the past that Chris did a lot more than Cyrax, because to be honest, Chris used to go out with his attraction sign, used to go out to the mall, sit there, try to pick up women, used to go to the library to try to pick up women. Chris actually was much more out there and outgoing than Cyrax ever was, but at the same time, Chris was very much still in his shell, not willing to talk to many people, up until he went into like his lesbian phase and got into all that shit. Then he talked to people a little more, but Chris was always much more willing to go out and do shit than Cyrax was. But at the same time, don't get me wrong, Chris still spent most and a majority of his time at home just doing the same shit Cyrax did, and that's just dicking around, pretending that they're famous, pretending that the shit they do is important, and playing their video games. And Chris picks up the first fall in the match. Now, the next similarity between the two is that both of them steal art. Now, Cyrax is a known thief of everything from art to a book he fucking wrote, stole the whole goddamn book, steals music. Cyrax will steal anything he can get his hands on that he won't be able to be confronted in real life about. He'll steal everything he can over online, but he's too big of a pussy to do anything in real life. He's one of these guys who, like I said, he hates confrontation, and once again, we'll get to that later. But Chris, on the same hand, Chris loves his Sonichu shit. And anyone who's listening to this will know that Sonichu is simply Sonic and Pikachu combined. Two of Chris's favorite childhood characters. Well, I shouldn't even say childhood characters because he loved these characters up until, well, today. I mean, he still thinks Sonic the Hedgehog's real, still thinks Pikachu's real. He looks up to Sonic the Hedgehog. So But you gotta remember, Chris stole that fucking art. All his comics. It's like there's characters from all different types of work. Meg Griffin's in his comic. The Transformers are in his comic. Every character you can think of, Chris has stolen it and put it into his own world, and he acts like there's no problems with that. Now, we're currently looking into the Alec Benson Leary calls on this channel, and you can see from Chris's point of view, for him to take characters and put them into his world, absolutely no problem. For other people to take his parodic characters and put them into their world, absolutely a huge fucking problem. So if you want to see more of that phone call, it'll be linked in the description below. It's definitely funny how we've been looking through it. I think you guys will like it a lot. But yeah, it's definitely a big similarity between these two. They love stealing their artwork. Cyrax, though, I think Cyrax steals a lot more than Chris now. To be fair, Chris has stolen some music too. Christian and the Hedgehog Boys are all cover songs, but at least Chris admits their covers. Cyrax just says his shit's all original and doesn't credit anyone else. Cyrax is a pretty blatant thief who doesn't really care about being a thief, but he'll never admit to being a thief. One of the biggest things that both of them do when they get pressed on something is that they love to deflect. That's why I look at them both as kings of deflection. Cyrax, whenever he gets pressed on something by Marty or anyone else, will always have a reason to be like, yeah, well, here's the thing, though. You've done this. You've done this to me, which makes me do shit. He'll never once take accountability, which is what we're going to talk about next. And he loves to throw other shit back in people's face to act like it's not his issue. I think the most egregious example of this is Cyrax with talking to the 14-year-old girl, how he acts like, oh man, what I did is bad, but it's not as bad as what old masshole over there, the girl who set me up here, did. She set up this sting operation. She set this whole thing up where I was going to talk to a 14-year-old, but I'm not the problem. She's the problem, guys. He can never admit to his own faults, and it's something that Chris absolutely does too. Because as I already brought up, we're looking at the Alec Benson Leary calls, and when Alec brings up all these things that Chris has done wrong to him, like drawing things in Chris's own comic of Alec getting killed, breaking into Alec's house in Chris's comic, just doing all these terrible things to Alec, Chris will always resort to, yeah, well, you drew my Sonichu as gay, so you deserved all this. Like, it's always deflecting to something else. He can never take the blame for himself. He always has to push it back onto someone else. And that's something both these two dudes do. And it's a reason I think these type of attitudes are the reason people ask this question of, is Cyrax the next Chris Chan? Because people always tend to look for who the next lolcow is, People want someone they can laugh at. They want something they can look at as so ridiculous and so contradictory to everything they say. Just something so ridiculous is always going to be making an ass out of themselves. Something you can just laugh at online. And it's what I think people think of when they see Cyrax. They see him as another Chris. They see him as someone new they can laugh at and someone they can fuck around with, because, it just reminds you of those good old days where Chris was getting fucked with by all of his trolls, It's just so outrageous you can't help but look away. And that actually brings us to the next thing, and that's the world of trolls that Chris and Cyrax both have to endure. Now, in Chris's world, we know that there's a large rogues gallery of trolls, from Clyde Cash to Liquid Chris to the Pickle Man to Surf Shack Tito. The list goes on and on and on. Now, Cyrax has his own good bit of trolls too, but Cyrax, more than Chris, has one main troll, and that troll for Cyrax is Music Biz Marty. Now, many trolls have come and gone from Cyrax's history, but the one that seems to remain the same is Marty. He's always there to fuck with Cyrax. Mostly every Cyrax video you look up, Marty's gonna be the constant there. When it comes to Chris, every fucking call has a different troll in it. Lars, Alec Benson Leary, Blue Spike, Jack Thaddeus. There's so many different fucking trolls. There were even the girls. Casey, what was the other one? Emily. There's so many fucking trolls out there for Chris. But it's something that both of them share, and it's that their world is very troll influenced, Both of them wake up every day, and they would just get ready to get online and have to deal with whatever the trolls would put in front of them that day. They keep going back into the shit, no matter how many times they're clearly, it's so obvious to everyone but them that this is a troll, this is someone fucking with them. They'll always walk back to it the next day and try to get a one-up on these trolls or act like something's going on with them. Maybe it's because they like the attention, who knows, but both Cyrax and Chris could never fucking walk away from their trolls, no matter how obvious it was sometimes that they needed to do it. And that's another similarity we can look at here. This is how naive both of them are, and that's something that Chris would fucking hate to hear, because you know Chris's least favorite word is naive. But it's true. You know, both of them, no matter how many times they fucking fall for this shit, they'll always fall for it again. You know, and it goes back to both of them having mental issues. Obviously, Cyrax and Chris are both pretty goddamn slow, but at the same time, they do have people in their life. Cyrax has his grandparents, Chris had his parents, and obviously both of them aren't the fucking best group of people, because they didn't give a shit about their kids enough to take them off the internet and say, yeah, maybe this isn't working out, maybe this is overtaking your life just a bit too much. But they had those people in their lives to drag them away from this shit. And the fact that they constantly, day after day, went back on and just kept getting into this shit, kept getting involved, kept getting trolled over and over again, you can't help but laugh, because it's just like, what the fuck? Like, this could have been stopped at any moment, any fucking moment, but they were too fucking incapable of not going on the internet. They were too incapable of not interacting with these people. They were too incapable of not falling for the same shit they always fell for. So I think that's a huge reason as to why people think Cyrax is the next Chris, because most locals are naive. Most locals are real stupid and will constantly do the same shit over and over, expecting different results, just expecting that they're in the right, always acting like everything's a game. But no one like Cyrax, no one like Chris really had that Truman Show aspect of their life as much as the both of them, I think, because it's really just their lives are just a fucking show. And it's terrible to say that, you know, these are human beings, no one's life should be a show. But when you get on the internet all day long, and there's so many videos of you out there, of you freaking out, of you doing this, doing that, all online, and so easily accessible, people obviously get to start thinking that, you know, all you have to look up online is Cyrax or Chris Chan, and there's so many fucking videos of them every single day for hours on end, yelling in their room on a webcam and shit. And we've never seen this in human history before. You've never seen looks like this into anyone else's life this personally. And that's what happens with these locals, you know. There you get to see so much of their life that people just become fucking like so amused by them, and this is what happens. And that's a big reason as to why I think people see Cyrax in the same vein as they see Chris. They just see it as someone who's wacky and goes on the internet every day and makes a fool of themselves. And that's about that, you know? But it's very rare to see people so fucking naive, so like lost in the world, to the fact that they keep coming back to this shit, and it just makes for these funny fucking troll stories that you never hear anywhere else but the internet. You know, you never hear a story of a man thinking that he signed with a fake music label called the Bender Boys and thinking that he was going to be a world famous musician. You've never heard a story about a man who took 2 copyrighted characters and really thought Nintendo was going to publish them, and he thought he was going to be famous, and he thought he was going to have a video game based on his adult life, which is still one of the funniest things about Chris. The fact that, you know, thinking that Sonichu would become a video game is one thing. Thinking that Christian Weston Chandler's Adult Chronicles was ever going to become a game, which, funnily enough, it did become a game that someone made. Someone made a funny little RPG of it that's out there somewhere that looks hilarious. But, you know, the fact that he really thought Nintendo was going to be like, you know what, that's pretty cool, we'll do that. We'll publish a game based off this obscure guy who made this obscure character. But, you know, in Chris's mind, he always thought he was fucking famous. He always thought everyone knew about his shit, which is once again something we're going to get to. And you know what, we'll get to it right now, because it's something big that you got to talk about when it comes to both Chris and Cyrax. And it's something that's a similarity, but eventually becomes a difference. And that is that a few years ago, I should say about maybe 10 years ago, you know, Chris was in that thought process, and he's still in it now, to a sense, where he thought, you know, he was world famous, that Sonichu had millions of fans, and that he could blow up at any moment and this shit like that. Just a big head, you know, a real big ego about him. He thought that the whole world knew who he was. And who else did this sound like? It sounds a lot like Cyrax, because Cyrax will tell anyone and everyone, but mostly Music Biz Marty, that, you know, you stopped me from becoming famous. If it wasn't for you, I'd have billions of dollars right now. If it wasn't for you, I'd be on a stage doing what I should be doing, entertaining the masses, shit like that. And it's something that Chris and Cyrax both do to a fucking T. It's really overestimate what they've done in their lives, overestimate how famous they are and what their work is. They both look at their work, Cyrax his music and Chris his comics, like it's the best thing that's ever been created, you know? They think that their shit should be fucking on a world stage, and they can't understand why it's not. And they'll blame anyone else, mostly the trolls, for the reason that it's not like that, you know? Both of them were convinced that what they did, their music and Sonichu, was absolutely perfect. They refused to take any criticism. Any criticism that was thrown their way was just brushed off immediately as, oh, these people don't know what they're talking about, because Cyrax thinks he's a genius, Chris thinks he's a genius. And obviously, Cyrax still thinks this way. Cyrax still thinks that one day his music's going to blow up, or he's going to become a professional racer, or he's going to become a professional UFC fighter, or something like along those lines. He always wants to do something new. And with Chris, Chris was always for sure that Sonichu was going to become a big product and that he could make money off it, even though in later years, Chris started to admit that he never saw Sonichu as anything other than something fun, that he never wanted to become a job because that would become too stressful. But at the same time, he still thought Sonichu would become worldwide and famous. He was very delusional about that. So when you think about this and how both of them wanted to become famous, you start to think, oh man, that's just their ego talking. That ego got pretty big on Chris and both Cyrax. Well, look where Chris is now. Chris is in jail, and Chris thinks he's Jesus fucking Christ. Is that something that Cyrax is eventually going to run into? Once Cyrax, this part of his life passes and all these trolls leave him and he has nothing left, is he going to start claiming that he's Jesus? Is he going to start claiming some wild shit like Chris? It's just something I think you have to bring up, because both of them obviously have these giant fucking egos about them. They both think their shit's the greatest in the world, so you can obviously think that at some point Cyrax is going to think he's much more than he is, because he already thinks it. He already thinks he's, like he said, he's world fucking famous. But once that comes to pass, how big does he really think he's going to go? Because people like this, their egos never get their egos in check. Cyrax will go the rest of his life thinking he's fucking the next big thing. He'll be 90 years old thinking he's about to blow up at any second for his music career. So it's something I like to think about, is that, yeah, maybe one of these days Cyrax is going to take that Chris route and start thinking like he's like a fucking god or some shit like that, thinking he's a wizard, thinking he's literally Gollum from Lord of the Rings, because he looks it, thinking he's like something more than he is. And it's basically anything, because Cyrax doesn't have much. So just like Chris, it's something to break away from that monotonous life they live. I think it's the day Cyrax realizes that he doesn't really have anything, is the day that Cyrax really starts thinking like, oh man, I'm much more, he already thinks he's a rock star, but once he realizes he's not a rock star, he'll start thinking he's something that people can't tell him he's not. So, we'll see if that comes, when that day comes. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I could definitely see Cyrax thinking he's a wizard or some shit, something where he tells people he can smite them, and if you don't watch your mouth, that you better watch it. Kind of like that other dude, Tony, the dude who thinks he's a fucking dragon, like him. Cyrax will start doing something like that, claiming that he's like a god. I swear, it's coming one of these days. It is. A few of the final similarities they have is that they both hate taking accountability, and you basically will never see them take accountability. Cyrax will sit and scream all day long that he has taken accountability, but his version of accountability is just going, yeah, I did it, I fucked up, sorry, that's that, and then wanting to move on from it and acting like it never happened. Chris, on the other hand, is much less likely to even admit he did something wrong in the first place. Cyrax will just admit that he did it and want to move on, if he admits it at all. But Chris is one of the ones who, just like Cyrax, they both have the same thing. Well, they'll blame anybody for their problems other than themselves. A good example of Chris doing this is the house tour video, where Chris took a tour of his house that was like badly hoarded and shit, recorded it, uploaded it online, and when his parents found out about it, they were like, oh, you better get that offline, or the health inspector will take our house, we'll get condemned. And Chris was screaming about, I'm going to tell everyone online who's re-uploaded it, I'm going to tell them on my command to delete it right now, screaming about shit, acting like it was everyone else's fault for the shit he did. And it's just something that Chris has always done. It's something right now, the shit that his mom, like, he's in jail for boinking his mom, and he's still in jail letters right now blaming Null, blaming all these other people, saying they'd failed a test. He didn't actually do what he said, he just said that he did that so that if people went and snitched on him, he knew who was true and who was honest and who was a fake and all this shit. So Chris, even still to this day, just can't fucking take accountability for a goddamn thing, and neither can Cyrax. Cyrax, you can always point to the 14-year-old shit. He immediately jumped to blaming the girl who exposed him for it and blaming anyone else who called him out for it. So it's something where, they refuse to take accountability. One of the most disgusting things I think Cyrax does with that is when it comes to his father. Cyrax's dad has been caught doing weird shit with kids. Cyrax's dad was arrested for like attacking a little girl on a bike path. Cyrax's dad was like looking up some creepy shit on Pinterest interest, but young boys and all that. And whenever Cyrax gets pressed on this, his answer is, just let my family alone and leave them to do them. Don't get involved with my family. So like, he just wants to brush shit aside, never acknowledge it, and just sweep it under the rug. Doesn't matter what he or his does. It does not matter at all to him. All that matters is that people don't talk about it, because that's where the fucking problem is. Now, this kind of goes along with the trolling shit, but both of them have had many, many fake girlfriends over their lifetimes. Now, Cyrax, unbelievably unlike Chris, has actually had a real girlfriend once or twice. I believe only one, maybe two, but there's clips of him out there with this girl named Heather, who's now dead, but that she was a girlfriend of Cyrax's at one point. Cyrax was even calling her kids his kids, even though he'd never met her kids, just from another relationship of hers. Really weird story there. But, for the most part, Cyrax still gets trolled with fake women. Once again, for like the 100th time this video, I once again have to bring up the 14-year-old girl. Definitely was a fake girl. Not really the type of fake girls Chris had to deal with, but, Chris had to deal with a fake 13-year-old boy. That whole story, the blue spike thing, is a whole story unto its own, but how many fake girlfriends had Chris gone through? A lot more than Cyrax, but they both had to deal with their own set of fake relationships, which is much more than any normal person has to deal with. So it's funny to think that these guys both had to deal with that bullshit that, almost no one else in the world ever has to deal with, except for like them and Manti Te'o. And the final similarity at the two I want to look at is the fact that both of them try to act tough and try to fight their trolls at their specific houses. Now, Chris, there's plenty of videos with him yelling at Clyde Cash saying, "You come fight me. You come fight me right now. I will beat you up and I will drag you in front of everyone." Chris has called Clyde out, and if Clyde did show up to Chris's house, Chris would cower in fear. There's a story of the day after, or not even the day after Chris had gotten home from the Pickle Man situation at the mall. Clyde had called some escorts over to Chris's house to help him with the virgin problem, and Chris was so nervous about this that he hid behind Barb while Bob yelled at them and called the cops. So even in a situation where one of his trolls didn't show up and just random people showed up, Chris hid like a fucking coward. Now Cyrax is much worse. Much worse in this situation, because I'll have the video linked in the description down below, as I always do. It's my favorite Cyrax video, which is by the Dust Smoking Hippies. It's the story of Marty going to Cyrax's house again, because Marty has shown up at Cyrax's house twice now after Cyrax has demanded he shows up so Cyrax can beat his ass, and both times Cyrax has cowered in fear, has called the cops, has asked his grandparents to go out and talk to Marty for him, and then after Marty leaves, Cyrax will go online and claim that Marty's a bitch, and Cyrax, if Cyrax knew he was out front, he would have been out there and beat his ass and everything. Cyrax is one of these guys who, he loves to talk his shit. He loves to sit online all day and talk shit at people he thinks he'll never see in real life, tell them to come to his house, because if they do come to his house, he'll beat their ass. He does this to everyone, too, not just Marty. Does this to William Gloryhole, does this to everyone who opposes him. Cyrax tells them to come to his house and all this shit, and then when people do show up to his house, which Marty has done, Cyrax will cower in fear, and then once that person leaves, Cyrax will begin the process again of telling that person, well, why don't you come back here, as he once did to Marty right after Marty left, told him, well, why don't you come back then if you're such a man. Cyrax, they both want people to actually fight, but they would never in a million years to do it. It's Chris much less than Cyrax. Chris would really cower. I feel like if Cyrax could actually go out there for a little while, maybe if he's mad enough, he'd jump around and start screaming. But Chris would never even dare to go anywhere near a troll. If he saw one of them, he would fucking cower. Now, I have a few more differences to end this off, and this one's a really divisive one. Some people will say I'm completely wrong on this. I even think there's a lot you can argue here, but I personally think Cyrax is much more driven in life than Chris. And when I say that, I mean Chris has wanted to draw the Sonichu comics. Chris has done a few of them, done like 13 comics, and a comic is a lot to do, to be fair. But Chris's whole life's work has amounted to a couple comic books, drawing the CAD plans for a shopping mall, building a bunch of Lego shit, building some Sonichus and selling them on eBay, which is already more than you can say Cyrax has done, to be fair. But for the most part, Chris just wants to sit on his ass and collect money, which once again, Cyrax also wants to do. But you never hear Chris talk about wanting wanting to be this or wanting to be this, wanting to be this. He only just wants to get Sonichu famous so he can sit on his ass and make Sonichu into a video game and all that. Cyrax wants to be a race car driver, wants to be a musician, wants to be an artist, wants to be a UFC fighter. Cyrax seems to want to do a lot with his life, and it just seems like everything is holding him back. You know, his own thought process, his own mind, his own body, everything about his own life is holding him back, and it's his fault, most of it. But at the same time, I really feel like, you know, if Cyrax was able to do anything, maybe he'd do it. I don't know why. I get the feeling that Cyrax is a little more dedicated to doing what he would want to do than Chris is. But, you know, I could just be completely wrong there. Maybe I'm just giving Cyrax too much of the benefit of the doubt. But I just think Chris is way too lazy to have ever done anything. And while Cyrax is definitely lazy too, I feel like if you gave him the chance to sit behind a race car, he'd be so fucking egotistical and so sure of himself that he'd rev that engine and think he'd be the best one ever. But we all know he wouldn't probably have the skill to even make it around the track once. Another difference they have is that Cyrax likes to tell people that, oh, they're going to get in trouble a lot with the law, and Chris does that a lot too, you know, acting like trolling's illegal and all this. But one thing I've heard Cyrax tell Marty is, you know, I've done hard time, bro. You don't want to do time in jail, bro. Cyrax did like a day in jail one time for like a situation with his family. Chris has now done over a year in jail. So that's one big difference, is that Chris is now, you can say what you want about Chris, but Chris has now done some decent jail time, you know? A lot of people who've been in jail will probably go, a year, that's nothing. But, I mean, for a common person who's never been in jail before, a year is a lot of time to have taken away from your life that Chris has now dealt with. So it's kind of funny to think that Chris Chan, you know, the same guy whose whole life revolves around Sonichu and all that stupid shit, is now seen a year behind bars. And it's actually over a year now. It's been 13 months. So it's very funny to think that Chris and Cyrax, and that's what we get into next, that out of these two characters, Chris is the one who's seen more jail time. Cyrax is a much, much darker story than Chris. Like, a much darker story. While Chris will sit here and talk about his ponies and all that shit, and his Sonichus, Cyrax is screaming about, like, these weird songs. He has, like, a song that I'm not gonna get into called Lost Innocence that I think just makes the Cyrax story more dark than anything Chris has ever done. The story is, I mean, that song that Cyrax sings is stolen from someone, but if you ever heard the subject matter, you'd understand why it's so fucked up for him to sing a song like that. But just the way Cyrax talks, just how many racial slurs he throws around, just how vulgar he is, the way he looks, all the stories about how infected body parts of his are, it's a terribly dark story of Cyrax, you know? And Chris's is fucked up too, don't get me wrong, you know? Chris's story, especially now with all the incest and everything, is terrible story, but Cyrax's story is just fucking... It's fucking dark. Being a third-generation predator, just there's so much going on there. Having like raped a blind kid, you know, it's Cyrax's story. It doesn't get much more dark than Cyrax. So I think that's one huge difference between these two guys, and it's one reason I don't think Cyrax will have the appeal to some people as Chris does. You know, I already get comments as it is, people saying, man, this story is just too fucking much for me, man. I can't listen to this shit. So I think that Cyrax is an acquired taste. That's why I think when the question's asked of is Cyrax the next Chris Chan, I personally don't think so. I think Cyrax is something that even the people who can enjoy the wacky shit Chris does, and like even like all the bullshit Chris has gone through, I think it's still a little bit harder to enjoy the Cyrax stuff, because with Chris, the comedy's a lot more dopey. It's much more like, oh, this dude's such a clown, he's such like an oaf. With Cyrax, it's much more like screaming bloody murder at the top of your lungs. Like, it's much more, it's just much more screaming and yelling and fighting. And, you know, if that's your type of thing, which honestly, that's kind of my type of thing, you're going to enjoy it. But I personally just see Cyrax's world as like a much darker version of Chris's. And that's just my opinion on this. If you think that's... A lot of people will say, oh, you're a fucking idiot for that. You don't really get this shit. That's how I see it. If you guys see it a different way, let me know in the comments below. Because I think a lot of people will want to talk about this issue. And, yeah, you know, we'll see where the conversation goes. But that's really the point I wanted to make here is, you know, a lot of people have asked this question, you know, is Cyrax like Chris? And of course he is, you know. know, they're both lolcows, they're both fucking wild characters. But I think it's just, you know, they're two different guys. They're two different beasts. But it's like I said, it's not gonna be for everyone. It's Cyrax's world, especially everyone who's coming from the Chris world expecting to see the same shit. So, yeah. And the match ends in a draw, by the way. So we're going to have to go on with this feud for more. I'm pretty sure this isn't the last time Chris and Cyrax are going to get in the ring together here. Before I head out, I want to give shouts out to Vanessa, Krabby, your mom, Churlish, Isaiah, Music Biz, Marty's Bong, Liz Vendor, Cody Hale, the Ghostbusters fan, Club Doom, Werman Bjornson, Sky, Scaly Schisms, the Echo Spectre, Mick Surly, Akiba's Beat fan, Kaitan, the Night Owl, and our good old friend Fiendland's Party Place. You guys are goats, and everyone who made it to the end of this video, you are a goat as well. I want to thank you guys for all the support, and if you've made it this far, like I said, you are a goat, and I can't thank you enough. You know, the weekend's wrapping up, my friends, but you know, we got a nice week ahead of us before the next weekend comes, but it'll be here before you know it, and you'll be right back kicking up, relaxing, doing what you like to do, having a nice relaxing time off. So that's always something you can look forward to. I say at the end of these videos that you always have to have something to look forward to, my friends, and that's what life's all about. You know, if you don't have something to look forward to, you're just going to be sitting there wasting your days away thinking, you know, man, what am I going to do next? Always have something to look forward to, my friends, even if it's something little, you know, your favorite dinner, going to a movie later with your girl, something like that. You know, just find something and you know, look forward to it. And that's really all I gotta say to end this one off. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and yeah, I'll catch you on the next one. Until then, take care and stay safe, my friends. I'll see you on the next one.